In this lesson, we cover the question that nobody is asking: what is the 40-40-20 plan? I'd like to introduce that concept to you as a way to navigate how directors plan for, attend, and act at a board meeting. The primary reason for this is to suggest that boards are most effective when directors come to a board meeting prepared with a lot of data so that no time is wasted at the actual board meeting reviewing things or hearing the reading of a report that could have been distributed ahead of time. So the basic idea with the 40-40-20 plan is that each individual director, in preparing for and attending the meeting, will spend 40% of their time reading reports ahead of time, and then when the board is actually in session, 2/3 of the board meeting time, that is another 40%, is spent engaging with the key operators within the organization on information contained in the previously delivered report. And then only the remaining third of the time in session, the final 20%, is spent on actually discussing pending motions and considering them carefully and voting in favor or against them. So the math is a little difficult here because the actual board meeting takes up 60% of this. So 2/3 of the board meeting makes up 40%, and the remaining 1/3 at the meeting is 20%, because a substantial part of the work is done ahead of time in preparation for the meeting. And having that preparation done ahead of time is the key to very effective boards carrying out their function. So we're going to assume that board meetings are 2 hours long just because the math is easier in that way. So if it is the case that your organization has 2-hour board meetings, it's reasonable to expect each individual director to spend 1 hour and 20 minutes prior to the board meeting, preferably long before the board meeting, engaging with information and preparation. Then at the actual board meeting, another hour and 20 minutes is spent getting more details on those reports. And then only 40 minutes is spent in actual consideration of motions, the kinds of things that most people think are all that happens at board meetings and all that is done by directors. So in breaking this down more carefully, we strongly recommend that all reports by the key players be provided at least 2 weeks before the board meets. It's asking way too much of directors to get this just a couple of days ahead of time. Many of the directors are very, very busy, and they can't put the kind of detached time that is needed in order to carry this out effectively. So early reports are helpful. There should absolutely be a report by the CEO, the president, or executive director explaining all the details that are going on that are a matter that should be of concern to the board. It is also necessary to have the treasurer or CFO provide a report as well, since the financial aspect is certainly as important as anything else that is covered at a board meeting generally. It may also be useful to have reports from others. For example, if the organization has complex programs, having the directors of that program there, and a lot varies from organization to organization. If it's an organization that has a number of sites across the country that they operate in 20 locations, you may want to have the property manager give information on things that have a big impact on all that's happening within the organization. But the information provided to the board ahead of time should be all the data that should be considered by the directors when they're in session. As an initial matter, going through each of these, when the director receives the report, our recommendation is that they print it out and mark it up with a pen. That's much easier than scanning through pages on a laptop at the meeting. Although some people, if they're more comfortable putting notes in the margins on PDFs of a document, that's okay. This doesn't have to be rigidly followed, but most directors, in our experience, carry out this function most effectively if they review it slowly with paper copies, pen in hand. and try it the other way with a PDF, and make your own judgment on how best to be prepared. But as the directors read ahead of time, they should do this engaging the issues on three key issues. One, anytime a director encounters a passage that they do not understand, mark in the margin what they would need to know to understand it. Second, they should provide any mark up any situation where they feel they need more data. It's possible that when they have information to understand and answer the first question, it'll take care of the second one. But where they feel they need more information because the report is not quite complete enough for them to make decisions, they should mark that in the margins. And third, they should mark any place where they believe they disagree with the conclusions made by the report. Every director should do this well in advance of the meeting so they come to the meeting informed and, in theory, do not need more data presented to them, although in reality there always is going to be a need for more information. But they should come with all the information that they can acquire that does not involve interaction. That's the first 40. So in a 2-hour board meeting, the preparation time would be an additional 2/3. That would be an hour and 20 minutes of preparation to care for that. Then at the actual meeting, you need to have at the beginning of the meeting those key players whose information was so great that they were authors of part of the report in advance. Always the president should be there. Always the CFO should be there, and anyone else that was a significant part of the reports. The one thing you do not want to do is turn the meeting over to those individuals that gave the report and have them take up an agenda. Anything that they wanted to communicate should have already been communicated in the report. Rather, they are there in a passive role to take guidance from the individuals that make up the board on what more information they need. And those directors, as they go around, will discuss those things they don't understand and need more information, those things for which they need more information generally because they feel it's incomplete. And in most instances, once you answer the first question of those parts they don't understand, that will include all the additional information they're looking for. And third, all those areas where the directors in their review of the report disagree. And in most instances, they may back off on the disagreement when the first two questions have been answered. But the role of the reporters, when they're at the board meeting, not to waste everybody's time, is not to give a dramatic reading of the report. Rather, it is to provide information in response to questions from the directors. And that process should take up about 2/3 of the meeting. Only the remaining third of the meeting, that is 20% of the whole process, is spent on actually considering motions. And that is the part that people tend to think is all that boards do. But in fact, most of the information that directors are involved in is gaining information so they have a context in which to make decisions. And in fact, very often, it will not take a lot of dialogue to consider a motion if the directors are fully informed before that motion comes up. Now, the way I presented this may have an implication that you do all the reporting first, and then only in that last third of the meeting, or 20% of the whole process, is the first motion raised. But in fact, motions should be considered throughout the reports. That's the most efficient time to do it. Once people on the board have gotten the data they need for clarity from those areas they disagree, need more information, or don't quite understand everything, once they've got all of that, they're ready to make a decision. So it makes a lot of sense for efficiency for those who prepare the reports. When they prepare those reports that are delivered to the directors at least 2 weeks before the meeting, they should include in that report the language of motions they suggest the board take up. Now, the board is perfectly free at the meeting to modify that language, but for the most instances, they won't. They will consider the motion as presented by those who are most informed on the issues. So when the meeting comes up, you have a report from the president. All the president does in regard to that report is respond to those questions from the directors on what they don't understand, what they need more information about, what they disagree with. And then they've got the motion in front of them to be considered. They take that up before they move on to the next section, and that will be perhaps the finance report or whatever else is needed along the way. But having the motions presented in writing in a report ahead of time makes it vastly easier for the board to carry out its activity logically and effectively. So there will be motions interspersed throughout the reporting during a meeting. And in fact, most of the most significant motions will be considered that way. But there are some issues the board needs to take up after all the reports are done that's not directly related to a report. And in those instances, examples would be approving the hire of a specific person based upon perhaps just a CV that was distributed ahead of time or a resume. Those are new business that may not have been covered in a report previously. So there is room at the end of all the reporting and motions arising from those reports to also consider new business, those that aren't covered ahead of time. The key takeaways from all of this are that boards are most effective when a lot of information is given in writing ahead of time and the directors engage with that material ahead of time. Then when the board is in session to make the most productive use of that, have the directors be the ones who guide the discussion, not the reporters, and then leave the decision-making once all of that is done. For most organizations, and it varies widely from industry to industry, 2 hours is kind of a typical outer length for a board meeting. However, it can be tremendously useful if the organization can arrange it to have a retreat once a year. Typically, this would be the annual meeting, but plan a day together, including a meal. And there's an advantage in the meal in not having business, just have the board members mix socially. It is amazing what a difference that can make as individual directors who may not know other directors well, find out about their background, make some kind of connection that can help them engage with each other on issues that come up later. It's very, very useful, even though it's not an agendized kind of activity. Then the board meeting can take 5 hours if you're having an all-day retreat. And for some kinds of organizations, that's very, very useful. And the amount of work that is accomplished at that meeting may make the other board meetings of the year shorter because a lot of data has been provided already. It takes less time to consider things during the other parts of the year. But we strongly recommend that every organization consider the 40-40 plan. Expect in the role of directors that a lot of your work around board meetings occurs before the meeting and is done with actual engagement of issues with pen in hand.